Thank you, Chairman. Dear friends, dear colleagues, my presentation here will make a strong liaison between politics and law. But I have to say from the beginning and say it loudly, I'm not here for political reasons. I'm here because of the kind gesture made by my friend, former colleague, Professor Mircea-Dan. He kindly invited me here. I thank him very much. Also, I'd like to thank to Professor Szilágyi for his wonderful organization. I think we all should be thankful for that. Therefore, this is my personal point of view. But I'll go back to politics because my main thesis here, you'll see at the end of my presentation, will be that this problem of family businesses, family agricultural businesses, is rather a political one than a juridical one. And I work on my specific Romanian example in order to demonstrate this thesis, this main point. As I told you, Professor Mircea-Dan told me about this conference, and the first minute, as soon as he told me, I remember as I found during my research, this booklet. It's an excerpt for one of the most important legal journals in Romania who was published in the 20s and the 30s, so 190 years ago. Its author is a former professor of my faculty in Cluj, Professor Alexandru Angelescu. He is dedicated to I translate it on the, let's say, family goods, family business in agricultural problems. That's the complete meaning of the title. I will go to this booklet towards the end because he is discussing the reform which was supposed to take place at the beginning of the 30s. In 1932, the Minister of Justice, certain Constantin Hamangi, who was the founder and the director of the legal journal where this paper was published, sent to the parliament a project concerning this specific problem we're discussing here. You'll see what happened to the project, but first of all, I'd like to show how we arrived to such a project and what was the fate of it. In order to understand, our former civil code was drafted in 1864 and got into force the 1st of December 1865. And let's say in a proportion of 70–75% was the translation of the French civil code. Why is that important? Because we have to look at the people who are suffering the influence of this code in practice. Who were they? At the end of the 19th century, 92% of the population were peasants in Romania. Out of them, 80% or more than 80% were extremely poor. Out of them, between 43–60% were illiterate. Therefore, when the civil code came into force, they were a little bit astonished. They were very reluctant to its appliance in practice. What happened? 3 years before, in 1862, the Minister of Justice, a certain Mihail Cogălnicianu, issued an agrarian reform. It was the expropriation of some lands of landowners in favor of the peasants. But this expropriation was conducted in an insufficient manner. We have to take into account that at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the Romanian peasant had between 10 and 15 children. Therefore, if he received, let's say, 10 hectares of land, in the first generation, it was okay from an economical point of view. But after 30 years, after one generation, these 10 hectares divided, let's say, to 10, or sometimes to 15. Let's say the descendants were left with 1 hectare. Okay, but after one more division, it was not sufficient enough to survive economical circumstances. That's why this agrarian reform, this land reform, who I repeat was enacted in 1862, was inefficient. Combined with the poorness of the peasants, with the very, let's say, very old manner of practicing agriculture. Some sociologists say, and the statistics confirm it, all these circumstances led in 1907 to a peasant uprising, which was a disaster. During this uprising, the army fought against the peasants. 11,000 were killed using the army. Another 10,000 peasants were arrested during this mutiny, during this uprising. This showed that this measure of helping peasants by means of agrarian reform was insufficient. On the other side, as I told you, the civil code, which entered into force on the 1st of December 1865, contained that egalitarian principle of division between heirs. Therefore, if you divide it, as I just told you, if you divided this land properties, agrarian property, it led to disastrous economical consequences. What did they do in practice, the peasants, the person who were suffering of all these circumstances? They avoided the civil code. If you look at all the decisions published by the High Court of Cassation in Romania, let's say Supreme Court of Justice, if you look at all the articles published on the subject of these litigations, you'll see all these litigations were conducted between bankers, manufacturers, landowners, mine owners, oil field owners, sorry, but no peasants. So the peasants lived aside the civil code or beside the civil code and avoided its appliance because of these less fortunate consequences he brought up. This situation lasted till 1920 because after this uprising of 1907, the political class changed of view. What happened, and here the politics interferes, they said, yes, the situation in agriculture is disastrous, we have to help the majority of the population. A new political class arose, and after the First World War, a new agrarian reform was conducted. The King Ferdinand I in the 1919 and 1920 issued several decrees of expropriation. In fact, all the land of former traditional landowners were expropriated. They were left only with a maximum amount of 50 hectares each of these former landowners. As a result, it was a real agrarian reform, and this reform led to a new building of a middle class. It was the main political purpose of the middle class of landowners. In conclusion, what I wanted to stretch out here, even if we didn't have until 1920 legislation or a tradition as you saw here on my previous colleagues who gave their speech, even if we didn't have a specific legislation on this subject, in practice, people, I emphasize here, farmers, peasants, knew how to deal with the situation and constituted their own property. How did they do it? They avoided the civil code, and on the other side, they applied the former customary law. You have to know that until 1920, because in this rural environment they did not apply the civil code, they were still applying the customary law, the unwritten law. What did this customary law said? At the death of a pater familias, to use a word used by a formerly used by a colleague here, at his death, pater familias left the household, and the land was, for agrarian purposes, serving this household, either to the elder son, elder male heir, either to a younger male heir. Why? Because the eldest son was the one who was helping all his other siblings on the occasion of their marriages, or they were leaving to the younger son, because the younger son was the one who was taking care of his parents, of his elder parents. That's why they applied this in this manner, and they had such a family business who lasted in the family and who was governed by one of these two persons. We arrived to 1930. In 1930-31, Constantin Hamangiu, the Minister of Justice I was telling you in the beginning, he was appointed in this posture, and he issued a very extensive program of legislative reform. In December 1931, he published a project. This book speaks about this project concerning the establishment of a family business property. And the model was very interesting. The so-called Household Enactment Act of Texas of 1839, who followed the American Depression in 1837-1839. The second model was the French Reform of 1909, and the model of Switzerland, where the legislation had such provisions. It was a combination between two models. For example, on this project it was stated in 2 months after its entering into force, each and every paterfamilias has to identify 1 hectare of agricultural land and establish it by a notarial, by a declaration, authentic declaration in front of a notary as a family business. This surface of maximum 1 hectare was designed not to be followed by any creditor. They couldn't put up to sale this piece of land, and it was designed to be left to all male heirs of this particular family. As you can see, it has its limits. But it was, let's say, it was an interesting point of start. Unfortunately, the Minister of Justice, as I repeat, he issued this project. He went with it to the Parliament in December 1931, but he died on January 32. So his political enemies blocked the project, and this booklet, which contains details, I won't last on all the details on its reform, was published in 1934 in order to revive the discussion. The discussion was revived more or less because of the opposition of some landowners. There are several problems at the level of agricultural administration. And all discussion stopped in 1938 when King Charles II established the dictatorship. Afterwards, the war came, the communists came, and between 1950 and 1962, all the land, it was expropriated from the peasants, so there was no more discussion on such private property. Afterwards, we know here the experience in Central and Eastern Europe what happened, so the discussion on establishing such regulation is now postponed, I don't know for how many times. In conclusion, in a very, let's say, strange manner, until 1930, we didn't need a legislation on such a subject because in practice, people managed to have something similar. After 1930, it was needed, but the political circumstances prohibited it, and for the moment, as I told you, the discussion that. What will follow, I don't know, because my name is Bob, it's not Nostradamus, and I can't predict the future. Thank you very much.